Joining us, we're going to take you shortly, when it begins, to a live news conference with BC Premier David Eby. He will be the third premier in the country so far today to respond to Donald Trump's tariffs, and this may also be focusing on his budget. Yesterday, his NDP government tabled a provincial budget largely shaped by Donald Trump's tariff threats. The budget projected a record deficit of almost $11 billion as the government committed to spending on core services and set aside billions in contingency funds, $4 billion in fact, the same day those tariffs on Canadian imports went into effect. The budget was crafted under the assumption of 25% tariffs on all goods from Canada, 10% tariffs on energy exports, and some retaliatory tariffs. Here comes David Eby walking up to the microphone. Let's join him now from Victoria.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday, just afternoon. It means we're halfway to the weekend, and that's just 6 more Trump tariff news cycles before Saturday. It's good to see you here in the sun. The latest news we've heard is that the president has carved out an exemption for some U.S. auto firms from the tariffs. And I heard from my colleague in Ontario, and I agree wholeheartedly, no half measures. These tariffs that are threatening the livelihoods of Canadians and Americans cannot be allowed to stand. We continue to stand with premiers and with the Prime Minister and with Canadians from coast to coast to coast to fight these tariffs. And we will continue to push back to ensure that Americans know and understand the depth of our integration and that pain caused to Canadians will be met with a fierce and strong response. With that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thanks, everyone. We'll start with Richard Zussman, Global News.
When should we expect the next phase of BC's response to the United States? In essence, what are you waiting for? And what do you say to Canadians who have come back across the border in the last 24 hours and been told they have to pay 25% more for the groceries they may have bought down there or the products they may have bought while in the United States?
For the first question, we're working closely with provinces across Canada around internal trade barriers, removing those barriers. I'll have more to say about that very shortly, and look forward to sharing that with you. We are working internally to make sure we have all of the legislative authorities required to respond and retaliate to the Americans. And we're also, and have been since the tariffs were announced, doing work planning trade missions to exploit and use the free trade agreements we have with countries around the world that do respect these agreements, that do want to do business with us, and that are very excited to hear from us right now because they also feel the threat of these tariffs. As for Canadians who are currently traveling to and shopping in the United States, I recognize that people have family and friends and businesses and how closely tied we are. I feel that very personally as well. But where you have a choice, please choose to travel in Canada, choose to buy Canadian, support Canadian companies, support British Columbia companies, buy BC first. And that will ensure we have our strongest possible response. Buying in the U.S. does potentially expose you to retaliatory tariffs if you come back across the border into Canada with American products.
Richard, for a follow-up.
There was a case yesterday in Vancouver where a police officer was stabbed or slashed. Our understanding is that the individual who did it is somebody that should have been in involuntary care. There wasn't any significant money in the budget yesterday to supporting your movement towards involuntary care. So how are we going to possibly fund out this? And what do you say to those who are watching potentially situations in front of their eyes of people committing crimes that should be in facilities that you have promised?
Yeah, it's not correct that there weren't resources in the budget for this initiative. We have Dr. Daniel Vigo, who's working right now he himself is an expert in the field, as well as with health professionals across the healthcare sector, with police, with community groups, to do a couple of things. One is to clarify the authorities for health professionals to hold people involuntarily at hospitals. when that's appropriate and when it is not. There's a bunch of folklore and sort of half understood interpretations of the law. He is clarifying and establishing a baseline across the province on that. He's identifying key populations, including potentially this individual who's involved in this horrific incident in the downtown east side. My thoughts go to this police officer and the police officer's family, and to everybody who relies on safe and accessible streets in the downtown east side and in downtown Vancouver. The work to identify these individuals who are a threat to themselves, to other people, proactively before there's an incident is a key part of his work. And we expect to see the opening of the Surrey pretrial treatment centers by the end of March, and then shortly after, the opening of the new facility at Maple Ridge to support the care that people need.
Next, we're going to Rob Buffum, CTV.
Hi, Premier. I wanted to get your reaction. First of all, Doug Ford came out very bullish yesterday, very aggressive, talking about imposing a 25% export duty or tariff on electricity, or ultimately shutting the flow of that. We've seen today Trump has put a 30-day pause on automobile tariffs, their biggest export. Should BC be doing something more aggressive than removing just red state liquor and prioritizing procurement with Canadian companies? Like, should we be doing something more aggressive? I spoke with the softwood lumber person who said, yeah, I'd love to see something like that with our electricity exports, or with water, or maybe the germanium in that smelter and trailer you've talked about. Do we need to do something specifically more aggressive than what we've announced?
Thanks. Yeah, we're working with other premiers and with the federal government on how we can support the Team Canada approach with non-tariff responses. Non-tariff responses are things that are in the provincial government's authority for us to be able to do to support this effort to retaliate against the American tariffs. We're absolutely going to support other premiers. There is no monopoly on good ideas and how we can do that, but we're going to do it in a coordinated way with other premiers and with the federal government.
We've got a follow-up from Rob.
Just wanted to get your reaction to three things from Danielle Smith, who had a presser earlier today. She said, yeah, we're taking all American booze off our shelves. She said specifically, we're happy to buy BC wine and Alberta craft beer, so good news for us. But I guess she also said she would welcome a free trade agreement and labor mobility with any province that would do it. Would you do that? And she also said on pipelines, she said there needs to be a significant attitude shift in provinces towards building pipelines east and west. Are you more open to pipelines being built now, given where we find ourselves?
I think there are so many things that we can cooperate with Alberta on and find ways to work better together, both to ease commerce between the two provinces, to expand prosperity for both provinces. And I'm very grateful to have a government on the other side that's willing to sit down and work through that. Our direct-to-consumer wine sales agreement that we reached with Alberta was because of the willingness of the Premier there to sit down with us and work it out. And when it comes to the resource industry, when it comes to electricity across the border, I think that we can cooperate in ways that will reduce carbon emissions, that will ease administrative burdens. The Premier of Alberta knows, and certainly it's no secret, how we feel about particular pipeline projects. But with that said, there are a huge number of areas where we can do work, where we're already collaborating, and that will address our shared interest in increasing prosperity for the whole country, as well as reducing carbon emissions. And that is what removing these internal trade barriers is all about. I expect that we'll be able to share with you very shortly the work that's been happening nationally on that, and British Columbia will be a part of that. We've been out very early supporting that. We've always supported getting rid of these internal trade barriers, and we continue to advocate for that at the national level.
Next, we have Katie DeRosa, CBC.
When you talk about buying local, especially in liquor stores, we've heard from several distillers in BC who are complaining it's too hard to make their products available in some of those government liquor stores, partially because BC liquor stores are charging a huge markup on their products. So have you heard about this complaint, and how can it be addressed?
Yeah, one of the good pieces of news for our local distillers and vintners and craft brewers is I suspect, and I think just based on what I'm hearing from my colleagues across the country, is we are very close to direct-to-consumer sales right across Canada for all of those products. What that means for them is opening up an entire national market that previously was closed to them. Our vintners can't sell into Ontario right now. They can't sell into Quebec. And same for distillers and craft brewers. And so the good news for people who enjoy those drinks is that they're going to have access to the best that Canada has to offer. And the good news for British Columbians is I think the best Canada has to offer is right here in British Columbia.
To Katie for a follow-up.
When you hear about the carve-out for the auto industry, does this tell you that BC is going to have to almost go it alone and be arguing for carve-outs for critical minerals? Is every province going to be asking for carve-outs for the industry that is big for them?
No, I mean, what the carve-out for automobile parts tells me is that Trump has realized in fewer than 24 hours how integrated our two economies are. And I expect more and more announcements about exemptions and reducing tariffs because it is inevitable that the damage is going to accumulate in the United States to American businesses, to American families with higher prices. And the timber tariffs that are being proposed here are going to be devastating for families that are trying to rebuild their homes. All of a sudden, the lumber you need to buy to rebuild your home from a flood or a fire is 50% more expensive. You want to do a renovation, you want to build a deck, it's 50% more. If you need aluminum for parts for your firm and you're competing with global firms, it's 25% more expensive than a Korean firm is paying to get access to aluminum. These tariffs are a profound economic mistake for the United States to lower costs, to grow the economy. You can see it in the stock market. You'll see it very quickly in the real life impacts for American families. And that's why the president is moving to remove tariffs on auto parts. And the best thing to do would be to remove all of the tariffs and sit down with Canada and renegotiate the agreement that the president negotiated in the first place so that we can all move on.
Alec Lazenby, Vancouver Sun.
Hi, Premier. I know the heavy lifting in terms of supporting British Columbians will be done by the federal government in terms of returning funds through retaliatory tariffs. But what is BC doing? We saw several measures in the budget yesterday, such as ICBC rebate, SAFER program. But what measures is BC putting forward to support consumers and also businesses who have been calling for tax measures at this time?
So one of the pieces we're working on is ensuring that our response to support businesses, for example, assist them in growing the economy, assist them in growing and pivoting to new markets, as opposed to just helping them get through. I suspect I'm not alone in feeling that the shift from what has been our closest friend and trading partner in the United States may last at least the next 4 years, and there may be a permanent shift in our relationship. I can tell you this for British Columbia, though. We are never going to put ourselves in the position, again, of being so dependent on the United States. This is an issue that was raised many times for many previous governments. It's never been a priority because the U.S. market is so close and so convenient. And now Canadians' eyes are opened and British Columbians' eyes are open. We have to ensure that we have a global basket of customers that are interested in our products, and that's what we're going to be supporting businesses in doing. As for individuals, we're going to make sure that people are supported through this. The federal government is committing to ensure their employment insurance program is there for people who are temporarily laid off. I suspect that our role will be in supporting people and training to take the job opportunities that are there, transitioning between different employment categories, to be able to support their families and take the jobs that are there because of the infrastructure that we're building, because of the fast tracking the major projects we're doing, and to be able to take those jobs that we're creating. Many people are going to need training and support. But at this point, we're early in conversations with the federal government about where these gaps need to be filled, and so we're going to continue those conversations. But one thing is certain, we will support British Columbians and families, and we'll support BC businesses in doing the work to help us grow and diversify our economy.
Malik?
Yes, on a different topic, you say that the Surrey Pretrial Centre will be open sometime at the end of March, I think you said, and that it's not true that there wasn't money in the budget for it, but are you able to provide any details about what funding was provided for the involuntary care measures that your government is putting forward?
Yeah, there's a significant boost to the health budget. It's for a number of different categories of work that we have to do. We are currently building out these models, which are the first of their kind in British Columbia in the modern era of supporting people with involuntary care. First, in a pretrial center, people are already under arrest. They need that kind of support. And secondly, on the site of an existing provincial institution with secure housing with care that people need. So the policy work and the work around the staffing levels and who will do this work, is it corrections officials and so on, all of that work is underway. The money is there to do this. We're currently working on identifying an additional site in the north in the island. We're doing regional centers across the province, and the work will not stop. The money is there in the budget to make sure it happens.
Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail.
Thanks, Premier. More than 10 years ago, the Western provinces signed up for this new West partnership, and that was supposed to deal with trade and mobility. What are you looking at for a model now? Do you need just an absolute straight-out mutual recognition pact between provinces?
Yeah, as much as possible, our goal is to eliminate any barriers between the provinces, that people who are professionals, whether teachers or doctors or nurses, are able to move seamlessly between provinces, that we recognize skilled tradespeople, the Red Seal tradespeople are able to move seamlessly and not have to reestablish their credentials, and the goods, that if they're good enough for sale in British Columbia, they're good enough for sale anywhere else in the country. There are some specific areas, though, where we're going to need to make sure that we're addressing those issues. So, for example, in Alberta, dental hygienists are allowed to administer anesthesia. Well, in British Columbia, that's not the case. And so they're going to require additional training to be able to work in Alberta. These kinds of nuances that come out, we have a public provincial auto insurer here in British Columbia, so does Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Other provinces don't. There are barriers to entry for auto insurance firms. So those are kind of technical things that are going to have to be addressed. But the goal that we have is to remove as many of the barriers as we can between provinces.
Many of the stakeholders I talked to in the budget lockup yesterday are frustrated by the slow pace of movement on interprovincial trade barriers. What can you tell them about why this is taking so long? We've been talking for decades about dealing with this, and now we're sort of saying there's urgency, but we're not seeing the results.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be speculating about the decisions of previous governments, but I can tell you that in day-to-day governing, the last priority for many premiers is to make it easier for competing products from another province to come into your province and potentially displace employment. It's a tough argument to allocate resources to those kinds of projects. But I can assure people who have been frustrated by this, who have been wondering if the day would ever come that they are going to be blown away by the level of cooperation and work that is underway right now to address this long-standing issue. I'm really excited and hopeful about this moment that we're in. Canadians are really pulling together, and all of my colleagues across the country, regardless of political stripe, and including Quebec, are embracing this moment, which is quite remarkable.
Les Lane, Times Colonist.
Well, thanks. All the U.S. booze that you yanked yesterday, does the LDB send that back and get a refund, or do you have to eat the cost?
So there's two categories, Les. One category of alcohol is exclusive to LDB. That'll sit in the LDB warehouse until such time as this trade dispute is resolved. But there is also a category of alcohol that the LDB distributes to private stores and to restaurants that will be available to them if they choose to make that available to their customers. But we don't expect any write-downs. The goal here is to stop all additional purchases from these American firms from Republican states, and that was effective immediately yesterday. No additional Canadian dollars are flowing to these distilleries, distributors in the United States, which is what British Columbians expect.
Follow-up from Les.
Yeah, different topic. You've got the monumental push on housing. It's been going for a couple of years now. Why does the budget state that there was a 9% drop in building starts last year and a 10% drop in building permit values and an 8% drop in actual units for building permits?
Yeah,
it's hard to process the drop given all the emphasis on it.
Yeah, thanks, Les. So for the provincial government, we have a number of different housing initiatives underway. In addition, the private sector builds the majority of the housing in the province. Private sector developers have been hit by a perfect storm of record rise in interest rates, dramatic escalation in the input costs, the wood, the concrete. Any family that's tried to do a renovation or a project like this knows that the cost of basic inputs has gone up quite dramatically. And labor issues, accessing sufficient labor to be able to build. And so when you put those things all together, many projects that were planned to go ahead have been put on hold by developers. British Columbia has been less hard hit, by other provinces in this respect. You can look at Ontario, where there are significant issues going on right now. Many of the developers in British Columbia have pivoted condos to rental housing to respond to the challenges that the current market has placed on people that would ordinarily be buying condos but have stepped out of the market right now. And so that's why we've seen an increase in rental housing, and that's why we're still leading the way in rental housing, and that's why rents are coming down. But the big challenges faced by the home builders in the province of escalating costs is a core focus of the Minister of Housing to make sure that we're doing all we can to bring down their costs so that they're able to build homes that we know people need, because our population continues to grow in the province and we know there's demand.
Wolf Deppner, Black Press.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my question. Question from a colleague. Last year, your government allowed wineries in BC impacted by the freeze to import grapes from Washington State, from other American states. What's the future of that program in light of the current situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Wolf. I mean, what a difference a few months makes. You know, here was an example of BC grapes being devastated by a climate-related weather event. A sudden plunge in temperatures and then a sudden escalation in temperatures killed all the grapes, killed the vines. Who did we look for? Who did we look to for support? Our partners across the border in Washington State, our friends and allies in the United States. And we said, you know what, wineries, you can bring in those American grapes, and we'll provide the same recognition of that as if they were BC grapes. And that's the kind of thing that we do to support each other. And that's what we've always done. And it's programs like that that are completely annihilated by the actions of one man, the President of the United States. And I think it's awful. And I know that for us, any programs like that are essentially null and void, because we can't be in a position of pretending like everything's normal when the President is attacking Canadian families and our economy with the aim of annexing Canada to the United States as the 51st state. Everything is not normal. And so we'll provide support to our wineries, our vintners, our growers, our farmers, as we did with the $10 million for fruit growers in the region that was so hard impacted, because it's critical for our food security, it's critical for our future. But we just can't look across the border like we used to.
Wolf, for a follow-up.
Yes, thank you. And what, if any, feedback have you received so far from the United States, from states impacted by these non-tariff measures that BC and other provinces have imposed? Has anyone in Kentucky sort of sent up signals saying, hey, this has mattered to some degree? Thank you.
Yeah, we have seen indications from Kentucky that there is concern about the boycott of American alcohol and alcohol from Republican states, particularly bourbon. Their concern is, of course, the Canadian boycott, but also the prospect of a Mexican boycott, as well as the prospect of a European Union boycott, because these are all countries that are under active threat right now by the President of the United States. These are decisions that he has made that is hurting American jobs, that is hurting American opportunity, and that is just one sector. And you can be certain that the reason for the exemption for the big three automakers in the United States that was announced today was a result of them going and explaining to the President in detail something that he should have known, which is how integrated our two economies are and how dependent these companies are on the relationship with Canada. And so that will continue to happen. I expect to see more of it, and we're going to keep the pressure up.
Shannon Waters, The Narwhal.
Hi, Premier. I know there's a lot going on right now, but we're coming up to daylight saving time again. And
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask if the change in tenor with the relationship with the United States has perhaps shifted your outlook on whether BC should make some changes to daylight saving time.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, and you're right to point out that my usual response to this is that our biggest trading partner and a group of people that we want to stay in sync with has not yet changed their clocks. But yeah, it is it's open to the the new world that we're in, that we stand on our own 2 feet as a province in relation to everything, including time zones. I'll ponder that one. That's a thank you for the poke.
To Shannon for a follow-up.
I didn't hear a definitive answer there, but I do have a question on another topic, again around energy exports. As this tariff situation has evolved, you've emphasized the working relationship with Washington State, among others. And I'm wondering if that desire to maybe preserve the relationship with Washington State has factored into the province's decision-making about what to do around energy exports.
Sure. I mean, it definitely, I'm sure, crosses the mind of many British Columbians. The president's comments when LA was on fire about withholding federal aid to California and his complete indifference to California and the west coast of the United States because it's Democratic governed. It's a factor for me, and it was a factor for me in deciding that British Columbia would boycott Republican state alcohol products because of our close relationship down the coast, and with the recognition that this is coming from the Republican Party towards Canada. It's definitely a factor in all of these things, but unfortunately, I do have to say that we have had to enter into contingency planning about our electrical supply and our relationship with the United States. We saw significant layoffs at Bonneville Power by Elon Musk's Doge Group, which to my mind, seriously weaken an independent agency that we depend on for electrical sales to the United States. They assure us that they are focused on the high voltage network that we depend on. But it's from a distance, the chaos, the uncertainty, and potential instability that these kinds of decisions cause means we have to have backup plans in place. This is one of the reasons you saw Minister Dix entering into agreements with Alberta to find ways that we can strengthen our interties across the mountains to be able to sell electricity more readily to Alberta. We've done similar conversations from dating back considerably, supporting work within the Yukon to be able to access BC Power. This is necessary work. We've also been forced into contingency planning around if the United States takes a similar step as Mr. Ford is proposing against us. We do import electricity from the United States at times of low cost when it's beneficial for British Columbians. What happened if that got cut off? And so we're also preparing to make sure that we're able to support British Columbians through that, keep the lights on. This is contingency planning that happened in case of emergencies, natural disasters, and so on. And unfortunately now it's contingency planning around a man-made disaster made by the President of the United States.
Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we have for today.
Thanks very much.
There is BC Premier David Eby speaking with reporters the day after a budget he introduced with an almost $11 billion deficit, focusing on what was ostensibly no flashy announcements in that budget, shoring up government services, health services, getting back to basics. Some concerns from business groups who say it doesn't do enough to cut red tape, etc. We're going to get to our Katie DeRosa in just a moment once she is set up. But let's have a quick recap of what the Premier just said. He was asked most notably, before he was asked questions, started talking about tariff relief and saying that he agrees with Ontario Premier Doug Ford that there are, quote, no half measures. They do not see, as we've heard from other officials and premiers in BC, they do not want to see a lowering of some of the tariffs. They want them all off the table when it comes to that kind of relief. And again, we're going to get to Katie DeRosa in just a sec. The Premier was asked about next steps on BC's tariff measures, keeping in mind the province can't impose similar to the federal government, it has to work on making sure that it has non-tariff measures. So making sure they have their legislation in place, working on steps around free trade agreements with other countries, other entities. He said for British Columbians shopping in the United States, if they're down there, when you have a choice, please travel and buy in Canada, buy BC. He says when you have that choice. For some people, he acknowledged that they do not. He was asked about funding for involuntary care after a suspect slashed a Vancouver police officer. And there were reports that the suspect was supposed to be in involuntary care. He was asked about funding for there, saying that the work for a facility at the Surrey Pretrial Centre for those who may be put in there under involuntary care is set to open later in March. He was also asked around Doug Ford's comments about tariffing electricity and maybe cutting off the power, as the Ontario Premier has suggested. He says they are working with other premiers on a non-tariff responses, and they will do it in a coordinated way. And he hinted that there are more things coming. We know that cutting down interprovincial trade barriers has been a massive priority for a lot of premiers now that they're staring at these tariffs and they're alive. They're now live. Let's go to Katie DeRosa now, our provincial affairs reporter, who was at that news conference and managed to get a couple of questions to the Premier. Katie, the day after a budget with few flashes, as you said. First of all, maybe recap what the questions that you asked the Premier and what did we hear from him?
Well, I asked him about the new news about the carve-outs for the auto sector, the 30-day carve-outs. I asked him whether that signals that every province is going to have to be, trying to go it alone and pitch their own carve-outs. I know Alberta Premier Danielle Smith had previously mused about carve-outs for the energy sector. I asked him, would BC be pushing for carve-outs to critical minerals, for example, or agriculture? And he said, he basically said we have to have a united approach from Canada. But he also said that the quick reversal on the auto tariffs shows that Donald Trump is learning how integrated our two economies are between Canada and the U.S., and that you can't just easily put these tariffs on without such backlash. So he suspects there'll be more carve-outs, and eventually he says that the goal would be no tariffs at all. So that's wishful thinking, but we've already seen some movement backwards one day after tariffs came in.
And Katie, what else stood out to you from what you heard from the Premier the day after the budget and the implementation of tariffs?
Well, it's, the Premier once again highlighted the decision to remove liquor from red states off the shelves. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith actually announced something similar today regarding not buying U.S. liquor for their government-run liquor stores, and as well focusing on Canadian companies for procurement projects. But, the Premier doubled down on, or explained why he wanted to just focus on red states, such as Kentucky bourbon. He said that when there was the wildfires in California, Donald Trump made statements about, well, we're not going to help them because they're a democratic state. So either a little bit of unity there on partisan lines, I suppose, from EB, saying that we've got to stick with our democratic governors who don't want this, who didn't vote for this. So, some conservatives, for example, have criticized that approach, saying why single out just Republican states. But that's the approach so far, and we'll have to see if other provinces follow suit with more retaliatory tariffs.
And lastly, quickly, Katie, what other response have you heard from yesterday into today around the budget itself? Higher deficits, some concerns from the business community. What's the mood?
Well, one question the Premier was asked is, what about funding that was promised in the election platform just 5 months ago, funding for involuntary care to ramp up our system of secure care for individuals who perhaps have mental health and addictions issues that results in violence. So again, that incident that was reported yesterday about an individual who was violent. And the Premier pushed back. He disagreed that there's no funding for mental health and addictions. He says that is under the health budget, which has increased by $1.5 billion per year. But we haven't really seen a breakdown of where specifically that money is going. We know, for example, there was a promise to build a second redfish facility for people with mental health and addictions. That was in the budget. So we don't really have a lot of specifics on that commitment to involuntary care.
Okay. The CBC's Katie DeRosa, our provincial affairs reporter, joining us from Victoria live after that news conference with the Premier. Katie, we'll let you go. Another busy day in the capital as the Premier and the NDP government defend the budget and look to see what impact some of the changes that we're hearing, at least at the federal level, on the tariffs implemented by Donald Trump against Canada. Once again, there is an exemption for the big three automakers, and the Premier indicating that that has changed because some of the leaders of those big three automakers went to the White House, or at least talked to the president and his officials, to demonstrate how interconnected both of those markets are. Thank you for joining us here on CBC News BC. We'll have much more on these stories and everything else on our website, cbc.ca/BC. I'm Dan Burrett. I'll see you at 4 and tonight at 6. Thanks for joining us.